Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's BDF44. Okay, so I just heard Max Kellerman say something on a segment yesterday. Just a quick statement that sent me into a rabbit hole, basically, in my mind about Michael Jordan and LeBron James. Now, I don't think I'm going to try to break down what I think in regards to these two players fully, but I can kind of point out a few things. I think this conversation is probably like a 4 or 5 hour conversation for people who really know those two players to try to break them down, try to compare them, and ultimately figure out who's greater. I ain't gonna pretend to do that on the fly, but what I will do is give you a quick opinion of what comes to my mind, a perspective piece, I guess, which is what all of my stuff is. Not a whole lot of uh, homework and referencing and things like that. I just look at what I see and I yap off. So if you want to see that kind of thing, that's why you come here. But either way, all right. So Max said LeBron James, Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan at his peak is greater than LeBron James at his peak. And he also said that LeBron James is 17 years makes him ultimately at this level, 17 years playing at this level makes him ultimately more valuable as a whole than Michael Jordan. I think that's what he said. That's how I took it. Anyway, that part's not important to me. The part that I'm going to focus on is whether or not Mike was greater at his peak than LeBron at his peak. Excuse me. The thing that I looked at when I judged Michael Jordan was not as much his winning, because even though he was the leader of the team, it still required teams and coaching to win championships. So while that's definitely on his resume and I definitely appreciate it, when I look at Michael Jordan, I try to look at him as a player, not necessarily as the team, the Chicago Bulls. So he won 6 championships, but so did everybody else who happened to win with him. Michael Jordan was not alone. Even though it looked like he was playing with a lot of players who were of lesser value, they made a cohesive team out of it. He led that team. So I always look at it that way. I know most people don't, but I do. Um, but that doesn't take away from the fact that Michael Jordan is still considered the GOAT. And the reason why he's the GOAT to me is because not only was he elite in scoring the basketball, but he was also elite in defending. He was the best player in the league on both sides of the floor the entire time he was in the league. At his well, at his prime. We ain't gonna say his first 2, 3, 4 years, not necessarily, no. But when he finally started winning, from the point that he started winning until the time that he left the Bulls, he was pretty much the best player on both ends of the floor. Period. Um, the thing about LeBron James is LeBron James wasn't the best player on the floor on both sides of the floor at all times. He had a few years where he was in the running for Defensive Player of the Year, but and he won Defensive Player of the Year once, I believe, but he was never the defender that you would consider just dominated the league his entire tenure. Absolutely not. You know, we've had Kawhi, we've had Dwight Howard. There's been many defenders that have come through and dominated while LeBron James was in his prime. So that right there is to be considered in this conversation. But the flip side of this situation in terms of defense is LeBron James really was a good defender and is a good defender in spurts here and there from year to year to year to year. Some years he's better than others. So it comes out to him being a good defender. If you want to look at it as make it balance out. To me, overall, LeBron James is a good defender. He would be great if he focused on it on that side of the ball and didn't have so much responsibility in Cleveland to carry the load on the offensive end. He wouldn't have taken so many plays off and strategically kind of put himself in positions to kind of relax a little bit and let certain things slide so that he can have the energy on the offensive end. And that made sense. That was a sacrifice that I think he made. So what he was capable of doing defensively versus what he was able to do defensively, I think are two different things. And I do consider that. He was I had something come to mind. That's why I stopped in mid-thought. But I'd say LeBron James wasn't considered someone who had to carry more of a load than Michael Jordan. I don't believe, because Michael Jordan was the focal point of the offense, and again, the best player indeed. But I think he was responsible for carrying more of a physical load. Um, Imagine Michael Jordan having to play Dennis Rodman's role as well. You know, that's how I look at LeBron James. So when I compare the two, even though LeBron James was probably more capable physically than Michael Jordan, and Michael Jordan did take on a massive load on both sides of the floor, at the end of the day, for me, the fact that LeBron takes so much punishment physically, drives down the lane, bangs more, I think gives him the edge in terms of how much the load was on either player. Who carried more of a load? I'm going to say Bron. Just for the simple fact that LeBron skipped from team to team to team, there was not really a whole lot of consistency. It was a lot more to adapt to, and he was still leading the team every time. As to where Michael Jordan had a set system, never had to switch up, never left unless it was time to to walk away for personal reasons. And when he came back, his system was still in place. A lot of his old teammates from before his retirement were still there. Pippen, basically. It was always a mainstay in the situation. Phil Jackson and Scottie Pippen. LeBron James never had that type of consistency in his career. Now, that was by choice for him. He read the market a certain way and realized that he can, have a little more control going forward than maybe some of the players in the past. And he decided to kind of do it that way. So because of it, LeBron James also, in my opinion, carries more of a load. I think that means that he's responsible for not only leading a team, but often leading new teams. So you could say the Bulls were a new team every year just because players are coming in and out of the lineup. Don't get me wrong, I agree with that, but it's not the same deal as finding yourself in Miami, find yourself in Cleveland, find yourself in Cleveland first, then going to Miami, then going back to Cleveland, going to LA. It's just a lot of newness, constant adjustment, constant change that LeBron James was forced to deal with versus Michael Jordan, who didn't often have those situations. In the end of his career, he found himself in Washington, but the rest of the time he was in Chicago the whole time. So, yeah, I think LeBron James carried more of a load in that regard. Was more responsible for more and took more punishment in theory. Who knows how much punishment Michael actually took? You'd have to go through the archives to really see. But for me, I think it's easy to imagine that a bigger player, LeBron James, who plays power forward, plays the forward spot, sometimes even five in stretch situations, it's going to take more punishment. It's going to be a part of more physical situations. I think the balance on the defensive end for Michael Jordan, having been such a great defensive player versus not being a very good passing player, known as a selfish player for a lot of the first half of his career, versus LeBron James, who's a good defender, but responsible for setting up the team, setting up plays and responsible for the duties of making sure ball movement is going down and all that good stuff, facilitating the basketball, having more of a responsibility to the team offensively than Mike probably had. Mike had more of a responsibility to himself in regards to making sure he gets his own shot. If he's passing out of a double team because he doesn't have a shot, that kind of thing. He's an offensive scoring weapon. LeBron James is much more of a all-around offensive talent. And I think that load, that responsibility on the offensive end does rival Michael Jordan's defensive elitism, in my opinion. It rivals it. So that's how I look at it. LeBron's passing just simply made the team go. Without him on the team doing what it is that he does, not only driving in the lane, making his threes and doing all that he does, scoring the ball, but he also has to make sure that his teammates get it in their spots. He also has to make sure that the ball is moving and things of that nature. So when you're dealing with LeBron James, I think he has more of a responsibility in that way. So already I've come to terms that Michael Jordan has less of a responsibility than LeBron James. His strengths versus LeBron's strengths are almost even though they're opposites in some ways. LeBron James is bigger, stronger, and faster. And LeBron James had to adapt to more change throughout his career. That still doesn't answer the question that I came here to pose. Who was better at their prime? Who was the best player between the two of them when they were at their absolute peak? And to be honest with you, the reason why I've come here is because I think it's even. And the conversation has always been about Michael Jordan. He's never lost in the finals. And he's won a lot of MVPs. Well, LeBron James just earned his MVP in a lot of people's eyes and only got 15 votes. In other words, MVPs are a political reward. It's not just being the best player that year. You got to have some other things lined up for yourself as well. And that's why we've seen guys get snubbed. Now, I don't believe that my guy LeBron James was snubbed personally. And that's not a popular take amongst my fan base. But I really did think Giannis was the MVP. And I've said that 3 times now on these videos. But I can definitely understand LeBron's gripe. I can certainly understand people who are upset. Why? Because LeBron James earned his spot. He, in my eyes, is the runner-up. And in 15 other voters' eyes, is the MVP. Out of 101 votes. So, that MVP thing doesn't hold a whole lot of weight here. I appreciate the MVP award, but Michael Jordan's 5, 6 MVPs, grain of salt here in terms of who could have also gotten that award to keep it from him, and he just happened to win that political race that year. So that's how I look at it. No different than when I saw Karl Malone win it the year that I thought Mike should have gotten it. It's another one of those years where it could have went a lot of different ways. Or rather, either way, I think it could have been one of those two players. Michael won a lot. Those are his accolades. The defensive accolades LeBron can never touch, and I don't think he has anything to rival that, to be honest with you. And I don't know if I look at the MVP in terms of it being a political thing and the defensive player of the year as if I look at it the same way. I don't know that I do. I think you have to earn the defensive player of the year award a little bit. It's more so an earned award, it seems. It seems that they get it right most of the time. This year, a lot of people thought Anthony Davis could have won it. That could be political too. Either way, when you have hardware, particularly the MVP trophy, 5 and 6 of them, it speaks to your dominance, but it doesn't necessarily tell the story from year to year within those MVP trophies. So I don't really think too much about that. I look at Kobe Bryant, I see he has 1 MVP. I laugh. That's a joke. The NBA dropped the ball. There's no reason for Steve Nash to have 2 and Kobe and Shaq to have 1 apiece. That's just stupid. Everybody who watched basketball those years knows that Shaq and Kobe dominated half the era. The other half the era belonged to Tim Duncan and the Spurs. That was literally what went on. So the fact that Steve Nash has his MVPs, he had phenomenal years, phenomenal numbers, but it's a political award. So, Michael Jordan, never lost in the finals, team award. Individually, better defensively than LeBron James, but doesn't pass even in LeBron's category at all. Not even in his 2 different players in that way. Offensively, scoring the ball, Michael Jordan, one of the greatest ever. No question he's better than LeBron in that way. Even though LeBron James finishes at the rim slightly better than Michael Jordan, even though Michael Jordan was an elite finisher, I'd say LeBron James is a better open court player just out of speed and strength and body and all that stuff, for which is the next thing. All of those things. Very much superior to Michael Jordan, size, all that. He's a bigger guy, much more athletic, much more physically gifted. Than everyone, not just Michael, than all humans. So when it comes to that counts. His physical gifts towering over Michael's physical gifts. I mean, that matters in this situation. These are athletes. We're talking about bodies too. So, and basketball IQ. For me, this conversation all ties together for who was more difficult to scheme against in both eras. So if I put LeBron James in Michael's era, and I put Michael in 2020, who would be more difficult to scheme against? And the answer is LeBron James. LeBron is a much more difficult player to scheme against. Now, the difference between scheming and guarding has to be understood. Just because I think I can scheme against you does not mean I think I can pick a player out who may be a very good defender and say you can be guarded. That is not what I am saying. I am not saying Michael Jordan can be guarded. Michael Jordan is, in fact, unguardable. So let's make that very clear. There's no guarding these players. I'm just saying who I think would give me the most trouble in a 7-game series if I'm in a coaching lab trying to scheme a way to win against them. And the reason why I think LeBron James is more difficult is because he is looking to make others better and score the ball. And at the end of the day, Michael Jordan is looking to stop me with his shooting ability, his driving ability, and his defensive ability to get the ball out of my hands and get in transition quickly. That's what he's looking to do. But because he's looking to shoot over 3 people and force certain things, even though he didn't always do that, but a lot of times he would force shots, not looking to pass. He ain't looking to run up the assist category. Because of that, I can zone in on him. I can literally collapse on him and force him to be a passer out of triple teams and quadruple teams and stuff like that. And even though he'll convert a lot because he was very good at it, he's nowhere near as good at it as LeBron James is. I can't even consider doubling LeBron James because he's going to make the right pass and get the ball to wherever it needs to go to make sure it gets in the hoop. Just can't do it. So even though LeBron James is going to take off some plays on the other end, on the defensive end, laying the ball up and things of that nature, on him, we're going to get some easy buckets because he's just going to take some plays off. Mike is not. Mike is never going to do that. Mike is going to exert more energy and probably get much more exhausted because he's going to be trying to exert himself more. And his teammates are going to be cold around him, in theory, in comparison to LeBron's team, who's going to have guys constantly touching the ball. Now, LeBron passing the ball does take the ball out of the best player's hands and takes away the quality of the possession because of it. And I think a lot of times that's what makes people crazy about LeBron James. I think even though he understands that making the right play is important, he never really understood that because he was the greatest player, sometimes when he takes the ball out of his own hands and passes it to a lesser player, that's a less quality possession because he, the best player, is not shooting the ball. And I think that's the one thing that he hasn't always understood on the basketball floor, especially down the stretch. He would take stretch plays, particularly laying the ball up and things like that early on, driving to the rim, but he would be kind of hesitant about taking long-range jumpers at the buzzer until maybe his second tenure in Cleveland, and all that stuff that's gone. But I would still consider his entire body of work when assessing the both players. And to me, LeBron James' timid nature, I think, does work against him in this conversation. But nevertheless, him also passing the ball works in his favor and against him at the exact same time because of what I just described. If the player that he passes to is a lesser guy and he bricks the shot, we have a less quality possession for which Michael Jordan will go down there, shoot the ball, make the shot, and their quality possession was obtained because of it, because he was shooting the ball. So that is a thing. That's a thing. I haven't heard any analysts really mention that, because when you consider passing the rock, you just consider the fact that it's going to make sure that everyone gets better, the team is better. But passing is something that has to be done at the right time. It's not just about making the right play. It's about understanding that you get the best possible percentage possession. So, you want your best player shooting the ball. At the end of the day, you want your best player shooting the ball down the stretch. And sometimes LeBron James doesn't give you the best possession because of his passing. That is the moral of that segment. So, how does that tie into whether or not they're the best? Who's better at their peak? Well, at the end of the day, I have to look at longevity. If I'm breaking apart their games, I have to look at how long this is going on. And Michael Jordan, at 36 years old, had the best jump shot I'd ever seen. But he was slowing down just a bit, and he was on his way out. LeBron James is a runner-up for MVP. He's playing above the rim. He's blocking shots. He's setting records, and to me, it seems like his team is well on the way, 7 wins away from a championship in 2020, his 17th season. Maybe he's at his peak now. point is, whatever Mike's peak was, it didn't last as long as LeBron's peak did. So who's better at their peak? The one I can get the most out of. LeBron James. It's the moral of the story. You can't break it down trying to pick apart their games because they're two very different players. You can't break it down by saying who had what type of path because their paths were so different. You can't use coaching as a conversation because Phil Jackson was in place for the Bulls the entire time, and LeBron James had different coaches just about every other year. That always going to work in LeBron's favor. We never going to, like, the infrastructure. It's just like any other situation. When you have an infrastructure that works for you, then you can work within it. But if you have to constantly change, that's a testament to you. So give that to LeBron James. At the end of the day, the longer LeBron plays, and if he continues to win, he can take away from some of the luster of Michael Jordan's unblemished finals record. Why? Because he's already been to more finals than Michael Jordan. So whatever Mike did in those 6, as long as LeBron can get to 6, he's already won more, played more, lasted longer than Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan can't prove what he's unable to physically obtain. He can't prove that he could have got 7, 8, 9, 10. But LeBron James can prove he can win 6. And then that would pretty much change the conversation from there. So what I've come here to tell you today is the conversation about the GOAT isn't over. If LeBron were to retire today, it would be Mike is the GOAT. But if LeBron keeps this up for the next 3-4 years, if the Lakers win another 2-3 championships, get him to 6, this would get him to 4 if he wins this one. He would need to win 2 more before he retires, which looks possible if Anthony Davis stays. So that's very possible. If he gets to that, what will work against him is the fact that he played with Dwayne Wade and Kyrie Irving and Anthony Davis. But that conversation will be a lot more. It'll be much more difficult to dismiss for a lot of people who are dismissing it today if LeBron keeps this up. So keep it up, LeBron. Stay with the Lakers. Trust the front office. Take care of your body. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep your soul right. And I think you have a real good chance at doing it. I think he has a real good chance of actually catching Michael Jeffrey Jordan in the GOAT conversation. He ain't there yet. And I don't think he's very close. But you can see the light at the end of that tunnel. You can see it. And a lot of people will never admit it. It's always going to be a nuanced conversation, and it's always going to be one that's debatable. But he can close in. He can really close in. That's what I've come here to tell you guys. My name is BDF44. Thanks for watching all that. I'm out.